Hello, fellow law nerds. Welcome to another summer session of Boom Lawyered, a Rewire News Group podcast hosted by the legal journalism team that has been warning you about the federal courts since the dawn of time. I'm Rewire News Group's co-chief content officer, Imani Gandhi.
And I'm Jess Pieklo, Rewire News Group's other co-chief content officer. Rewire News Group is the one and only home for expert repro journalism that inspires you to fly a flag like Martha Alito. And the Boom Lawyered podcast is part of that mission. So a big thanks to our subscribers and a welcome to our new listeners.
And viewers, because Boom Lawyered is back on video and we are so excited about that.
So good to be back on video, friends. All right, let's get into it again. During summer session, Imani and I take a look at some of the biggest legal issues of the zeitgeist and break them down with the help of a guest each episode. This episode, we are talking about Trump and the federal courts.
And we are animated about it. We are animated about it because Donald Trump didn't just mess up the presidency. He basically kneecapped the federal courts for a generation, right? With the help of Mitch McConnell, he rammed through over 230 federal judges, most of them young, hard-right ideologues who will be shaping the law long after somebody hopefully buries Trump in an unmarked grave. These aren't just Supreme Court justices like Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, aka Justice Kegstand, and Amy Coney Barrett. We're talking about appeals courts stacked with Federalist Society darlings and trial courts run by people who think the Voting Rights Act is a relic and Roe v. Wade was, quote, egregiously wrong before it was even overturned. And let's not get started on Brown v. Board of Ed. They don't like that either, right? We're talking 3 Supreme Court justices, 55 judges to the United States Courts of Appeals, 177 judges to the United States District Courts, and then 3 judges to the United States Court of International Trade, which you've probably never heard about, and that's fine. We're not going to explain it.
So many judges. And honestly, this is one of the most important topics we could cover because with all of Trump's power grabs going on right now, none of them would be possible without the tacit and sometimes explicit help of the federal courts. That's why we are thrilled to welcome Alliance for Justice President Rachel Rossi to the show to help walk us through what on earth is going on with the courts. Welcome to Boom Lawyered, Rachel.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Quite honestly, I feel honored. So thanks for having me.
Oh,
it's just nice to say Alliance for Justice for a change instead of Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be honest.
Love it. Yep.
Okay, let's start with a level set here. We're about 6-ish months into Trump's second term, and where do things stand with the conservative capture of the federal courts?
So, one thing that we're seeing, it's one of the slowest rollouts of judicial nominations of any presidency, probably because the administration is really busy with so many awful, terrible things across the board. But what we've seen so far, 5 circuit nominations made, 2 of them confirmed, 11 district court nominations, 3 of them confirmed. And what we're seeing is just, I think, a heightened level of terrifying when it comes to the nominees we're seeing.
Why do you think that the Trump administration in particular has been so efficient in the way it's handled its judicial nominations? This may be a slow rollout in this term, but as Imani described in the upfront, it was not the case at all in the Trump first term. It felt like every day there was 8,000 new terrible people on a list that were facing Senate confirmation. What is it about Republicans and the Trump administration right now that has had them so laser focused?
So one might say they learned from the last term. Or one might say that they are just hyper focused on a specific type of judge this go around. Of course, we're still seeing judges that want to roll back our rights. We're still seeing, highly extremist conservative viewpoints. But then on top of that, we're seeing this very disturbing new standard of just straight up loyalty to Trump, just willingness to kind of do whatever it takes to obey this administration.
But buried in the barrage of bad news from this administration is the fact that so far this term, Trump has a handful of jamokes confirmed as federal judges. What should our audience know about Emil Bove and Josh Devine and the damage that they could do from the bench?
Right. Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head about these two jamokes of nominees, and I think there's a lot of question about how you pronounce Bove, how you pronounce his name, but this is someone who was Trump's personal lawyer in multiple cases. But then what we've seen with his record is incredibly disturbing. Amil Bove has been a very high-ranking official at DOJ, and in that role, he entered into a very dangerous quid pro quo with the New York City mayor, where essentially he said, comply with Trump's mass deportation agenda and we'll drop corruption charges. I mean, that is crazy. We also saw after defending Trump, coming into DOJ, he fired all the January 6th prosecutors. He tried to say that he didn't do that, but when all the prosecutors who fire are the ones that worked on January 6th cases, I think the proof is in the pudding. And then we've seen so many whistleblowers come forward. I've been finding it hard to keep track.
Mhm.
I want to say 4 whistleblowers. But then, he actually is, we have a whistleblower who's come forward to say that he directed DOJ lawyers in his position of authority at DOJ to just tell the courts, fuck you, and just obey Trump, not the courts. I mean, this is a record that I think, unlike we've really seen with a nominee to a circuit court. So incredibly dangerous and really disheartening that he was confirmed and that we didn't see a backbone and kind of standing up against him as a nominee. Then Josh Devine, I mean, this is someone who wants to bring back literacy tests at the polls, a Jim Crow era voter suppression tactic. He's in support of it. He has opinions where he has fought student loan debt relief. He has defended Missouri's law banning gender affirming care for trans minors. He has defended a near total abortion ban, supported a lawsuit to restrict mifepristone. He's just really an incredibly terrible nominee. And I think, it's also worth mentioning Whitney Hermendorfer for the Sixth Circuit. I mean, this is someone who supported Trump on ending birthright citizenship in the Trump v. Casa case. So we're just seeing a really terrible crop of nominees.
I often say that I plan on fighting for abortion rights probably until I leave this earth, right? It just, the way in which Trump has reshaped the courts makes it really difficult to sort of claw back rights that we've lost. Can you
Mhm.
talk about how they're going to shape certain cases around certain issues in the years to come, particularly because these guys are like in their 30s and 40s and are going to be on the bench for a long time, potentially a pipeline to the Supreme Court? How does that affect the rest of us?
I think, you're absolutely right to talk about the fight for the right to abortion. I mean, when we talk about protecting trans minors, we talk about just all of the civil rights that we have fought for so many years that are already being clawed back. But then you look at Amil Bove on the Third Circuit, this is a court of appeals that will oversee any of the challenges to elections in the Third Circuit, which includes Pennsylvania.
Mm.
These are critical seats, and I do think it's quite scary that we've got nominees in these seats who are willing to say "f you" to the law and just obey Trump. Of course, we're going to see the rolling back of rights. I think that's something that we know. But what I'm fearful of is, where are we going to also see just sheer abandonment of the rule of law just to obey the Trump agenda? And that to me is what's quite terrifying.
And I have another question, real quick. Also, you mentioned that there doesn't seem to be any backbone in opposing these nominees. I agree with you, and I think Jess would agree with you. We've been yelling about the courts for a while. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes. And by the way, thank you for yelling about the courts for a while, because I think it's so important. And, oftentimes it's something that we overlook, but the courts really, they have a hand in everything that we care about, every issue, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I will say with the Amil Bove nomination, at least we've seen 2 Republicans vote no on him. We saw Susan Collins, we saw Murkowski vote no, which I think is something. But we should have had way more Republicans standing up and saying, what, we are actually going to support the rule of law in this country, and we are not going to support this nominee. But we just didn't see that. We saw markup hearing when the Democrat Judiciary Dems all sort of stormed out in a rage. Senator Booker raised a point of order and asked to continue debate. And they just, I mean, if you saw Chairman Grassley turned his chair away from Booker and just kept going, calling the votes, and just ignored the procedural objection and just jammed this nominee through. So, when we're talking about lack of backbone, we're also just talking about a willingness to disregard the procedure, the rules, to really try to jam through these terrible nominees.
And that's really been the long arc of this story here. I mean, Imani and I are old enough to remember the Obama years and the Merrick Garland fight and, everything that Republicans did to hold up Obama nominees that made then the flooding of confirmations under the Trump administration possible. So I really appreciate you pointing out the fact that Republicans here have ceded a lot as well. I mean, it is natural, I think, for us to put our attention to Democrats, but Republicans need to clean their own house. And until they do, we're kind of left twisting in the wind. And, Imani and I have been talking about this on the podcast a lot, and we've always taken the position here on Boom Lawyered that judicial appointments have, since the dawn of time, been political, even if Democrats were reluctant to treat them as such. And, during the first Trump administration, we talked about the need for progressives and Democrats to unpack the court because really Republicans and conservatives had been packing it with extreme ideologues like we've been talking about. Now that we're in the second Trump administration and we're going to have even more Trump judges, are we just kind of stuck with this as the federal judiciary? Help? What can we do?
Well, yes. I think the short-term answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
But the long-term answer to that is no, hell no, absolutely not. In the immediate, Republicans control all three branches of government. There's not a lot of power that we have to really stand against these terrible nominees. And, the Bovey confirmation, I think, just shows it's going to get worse,
Yeah.
right? And that we are going to see there's few judges that these Republicans will not confirm. But I will say, I do think there's hope. And, one thing we have to do is we have to continue talking about it. We have to continue opposing them. We have to delay. We have to stand firm against these terrible nominees. We have to keep doing what you all are doing, just bringing light to the public about the harms of what these nominees are doing and will do to our courts, to our rule of law, to our country. But then I also think while we are doing this active kind of opposition, we have to start laying the groundwork for hopefully 3.5 years from now. I think I have a countdown. We have to start laying the groundwork to take back the courts, and we have to be more strategic about it, right? Like we have to be thinking about building the bench now. We have to be thinking about building solid, professionally, demographically diverse movement lawyer candidates to be nominees. But then we also have to be thinking about, could we fill seats in magistrates today? And we also have to be thinking about when we do get to a place, hopefully, when we are in power, how are we more intentional about things like SCOTUS term limits, ethics reform, Supreme Court expansion? We have to be thinking about a future strategy where we're even more intentional about protecting our courts.
Yeah, I mean, it's not sexy at all, but the federal courts are civic infrastructure. And it's another point that Imani and I talk about all the time, that even before all of the shenanigans around appointments, there was a real need for structural reform in the federal judiciary because caseloads are so heavy. And it's been an eternity since we expanded appellate circuits, even as the country and population has grown. So there are structural answers. Do you think that there are conservatives in the pipeline who are willing to not fall into the, achievement trap, knowing that if they step in line with where the conservative legal movement is now, with where the Republicans have gone completely MAGA, that's their pathway for professional success right now? Do you see or believe that there are conservatives who are like, no, actually the rule of law is where I'd like to stay?
I do think we're seeing that. With the Amil Bovey nomination, we did see a few conservative voices sort of being bold and saying, we're not going to stand for this. We saw judges coming out and signing letters in opposition, which I think, judges normally kind of like to remain quiet. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that that will be the case, but I will say, I would have hoped that that would have been louder at this point already, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see. And we'll also have to see, how intense do the attacks on the rule of law become? And then we're just going to have to see how brave are Republicans, conservatives going to be? Because I think there's also just this fear that we're
Yeah.
hearing from, across the board, fear of the administration coming down on them.
Yeah. The retaliation fear is real.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to circle back to something you said about what Democrats could be doing now in advance of potentially taking back some form of government in the next 3.5 years. You said that they could fill seats in magistrate. Can you explain to our listeners what that means? Because I'm sure there are some people who are like, wait a minute, I don't know what that means. Please explain.
Sure, sure. So if you don't know what a magistrate judge kind of handles a limited docket of matters. And what we've seen is that increasingly magistrates are being named also to district court seats. But magistrate appointments they're done separate from the entire confirmation political process. And they're actually chosen by the district court or sometimes the circuit court in their district, in their region. Different jurisdictions across the country have different processes to get to seat magistrate judges. They sometimes have panels of judges with interviews. There's a lot of different procedures to get magistrates seated. But it is something we can do now because we do have 235 Biden judges now on the courts across the country who are many times in this position of power to make that decision.
Thank you for that. And now to turn to something a little bit frightening. I know none of us wants to think about the possibility of Trump nominating yet another Supreme Court justice, but if you had to guess who is ripe for retirement, and please say Clarence Thomas, and who do you think might be on Trump's SCOTUS shortlist?
Yes, it's terrifying to even think of. And we haven't really heard any indications or murmurings of retirements, but we have seen reporting that the White House is preparing for it, that they are gearing up and they're ready. One of the things I find quite troubling is that they've been very express that they want to emulate Thomas and Alito. Like that's their mold. Like that's who we want to find, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think is also interesting, I want to wait and see where would Trump go with a nominee. We've all kind of agreed that Amy Coney Barrett is not a moderate, but it's clear that they kind of want something more in this moment. They want a different level of loyalty and obedience. We've seen, I think, a lot of the public reporting about the short list. Andrew Oldham on the Fifth Circuit, who clerked for Alito, Naomi Rao on the DC Circuit, who clerked for Thomas. We've also heard rumors of Eileen Cannon, the judge in the Southern District of Florida who ruled favorably for Trump on the classified documents case in the Mar-a-Lago Club, right? We've heard James Ho, the Fifth Circuit, Amol Tapar in the Sixth Circuit. We've heard, a lot of these names. We've also heard rumors that Amil Bovey could be primed for a SCOTUS seat, but I think a lot of that is rumor, and we'll just have to see if we are in that situation, where is this administration going to take it?
I can't imagine Emil Bovey or Emil Bove or whatever, however you pronounce his name, but imagine sitting in a confirmation hearing and having to answer questions about why you said, tell the courts that you want to now be appointed to, fuck you, we're not following the rule of law. How do you even wrestle with that?
Right. And remember, in his confirmation hearing for the current seat, when asked about that, his response was, I do not recall. Like, you don't remember if you said the words fuck you in your position of authority at the Department of Justice in directing attorneys whether to obey court orders. You forgot. I think it's just completely implausible. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that would be quite the terrifying consideration for this seat. And we'll just have to see how brave they're going to be if that happens.
If that happens, let's say an Emil Bove ends up on the court or another really right-wing jamoke, Matt Kasmarek ends up on the Supreme Court. How fast can we expect to see that impact, right? Like, are we talking about just like an immediate lurch even further to the right than we are now? Or is it going to be more of like a slow burn, a just dismantling of rights here and there until we wake up in 10 years and realize we have no rights left?
So, I mean, some of it's going to depend on timing, right? Like when this person's nominated and all of that. But I think a quick and just a fast erosion of rule of law is what we would see, because that's what we're seeing now, right? Like that's what we're seeing with the nominees that we've seen already, but also what we're seeing more broadly with the Trump administration's agenda is fast, forget the rules, forget the procedure, just move, right? And so I do think that's the danger, that if we see a nominee like that, how quickly, I mean, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson talked about in one of her dissents, we're very close to the end of this republic as we know it. And I think that's what would happen.
Just even without a new nominee, I feel like the Roberts Court is there in the way that it's operated with the shadow docket in enabling this administration in its early months. And I go around ruining everybody's mood by suggesting that Chief Justice Roberts is actually a dark horse for retirement, because he's partisan enough to make sure that he gets a Republican to appoint his successor and young enough to enjoy life off the court, right? He can easily write a couple books, do some speaking engagements, make like a cool side hustle, and be the sort of, balls and strikesy kind of guy. So that's my mood ruiner there for everybody.
Well, nothing's off the table, right? Like
Right?
we're in an unprecedented time, and little surprises me these days.
It really is. I think Thomas is having fun, but I could see Alito as a certain possibility. But I do want to go back to the fact that the pipeline of candidates, even, I made a Mike Lee joke. We've got James Ho. Those are, folks who have pedigree in the legal movement, but they are still so conservative to what used to be the regular sort of normal Republican judicial appointment. How has the pipeline of potential Republican appointees become so extreme?
I think your characterization is exactly right. The standard that we're seeing now is not just Federalist Society member, not just let's make sure you've had some opinions that are conservative, right? It's that plus. And what we're seeing that plus to be is just quite honestly just straight up loyalty to Trump. The willingness to support his actions, his agenda. And to me, what I think is most troubling, when you look at judicial nominees in conjunction with kind of the broader strategy we're seeing from this administration to weaken the power of the courts, to make Trump a king, that's what's terrifying to me. We've got the Trump immunity case
Mm-hmm.
that sort of gave him this free range, right? Then we have the CASA case that took away the power of the lower courts to really rein in illegal actions by the president, the firings of inspector generals, the threatening courts who don't rule a way that the administration wants them to rule, attacking law firms for not taking cases in Trump's favor, right? Like it's a strategy across the board to weaken any checks and balances against Trump, right? And so that's what's terrifying about these nominees. You look at Bovee, his record, you look at Hermendorfer, who stood up for Trump's crazy birthright citizenship claims. You look at Ed Artow from Florida, who ruled in Trump's favor on the defamation lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing nominees that are part of this larger plan to weaken the power of any of our tools and mechanisms that hold the executive accountable, to weaken all of that to kind of make Trump king.
If that's the legal landscape that we are in, and I agree with you that that's certainly what it feels like, what do you say to young lawyers or law students right now who are like, holy shit, man, I'm just trying to get through?
Right. I feel like I hear quite often, so where's the hope? Is there any hope?
Yeah.
Can you give me some hope? Right. And I think hope is not just something nice to have, it's critical in this moment. We're seeing lawyers and judges be creative and bold. We're seeing, after the CASA case that said, no more universal injunctions, we're seeing litigation and cases that are trying to get around that in creative ways, right? Like there are ways that we're seeing people stand up, be creative, be strategic, that I think gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
I also think people got to find their lane, right? Like as a law student, as a young lawyer, you may not be the person who's filing the case that is going to save America, right? But there is something you can do. And sometimes it's finding collective power. There's ways that we can kind of get engaged together. I mean, just being involved in understanding the nature of the courts and being a part of the loud opposition.
Right.
I will say this, Amil Bovee had, he was very close to not being confirmed. He had 2 Republicans vote no, right? That wouldn't have happened if we didn't have whistleblowers come forward bravely, if we didn't have groups, nonprofit organizations, who, by the way, are also under attack by this
Mm-hmm.
administration and could very well just sort of be quiet and kind of decide not to poke the bear. But we're now seeing, all these voices that came forward, all these nonprofit organizations that continued to resound the alarm. And I think it mattered. I think it did matter. And I think we should, learn what we can from that process, learn what we can, hone our strategy, and be stronger in the next nomination, in the next fight.
This conversation has been amazing, but it has been admittedly pretty grim. And since we refuse to close our show on a downer note, can we talk for a minute about some of the good in the federal courts right now, including Ketanji Brown Jackson doing originalism better than the originalists? So, how do you see Jackson leaving her mark on the court and, more importantly, on the law?
As a former federal defender myself, I never thought I would see the day that we would have a former federal defender on the bench. And it's thrilling to see just the way that she is taking a leadership role. I mean, you're absolutely right that she surprised folks by saying, I'm an originalist, right? When we've seen that be a tool used by conservatives on the court. Some say, she's using that tool better than they are, right, against them.
Mm-hmm.
Some say it's not working. You're not convincing them to change their mind, right? I don't think that's the point. What Justice Jackson is doing is she's helping the public to understand the gravity of these decisions. She's using the tool of originalism in a way that is demonstrating that it was always a sham, right? Like she's like using the tool that they have used to bring these very regressive conservative aligned with a particular agenda rulings to rule in a different way. And she's showing the world and showing people more broadly, originalism is a sham. It's not what they have sort of leaned on it to be, right? If anyone needs to have hope, just go read Jackson Dissents. Like that'll just make you feel, I think, joyful. I mean, there's so many great quotes, I think, that she
Mm-hmm.
has really just been bold and called it what like it is, just said what we've all been wanting to say, right? And so I do think that it's a helpful strategy because it brings the public into this conversation. It calls out what's really going on for people who may not be able to like parse out all the different complexity of different, types of background and approaches to judicial precedents, but it allows the rest of us to be like, yeah, no, what's actually happening is you're making Trump king, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
can understand as the public.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about it is that it seems like she's kind of scaring some of the conservatives on the court. I'm thinking specifically about Amy Coney Barrett's the way that she just laid into Jackson in her majority opinion in a way that I don't recall anyone being that frankly rude towards, someone who's supposed to be a colleague, like you're supposed to have this collegiate relationship. So, do you think that she's making people nervous? Do you think that the fact that she's not going the route of most liberal justices where they talk about the Constitution as a living, breathing document, she's like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to go back and talk to what it was, these old white guys with wigs and tights were trying to do when they passed the 14th Amendment. Let's get into it. Do you think that she's making people nervous?
I think that's right. I think, they wouldn't be calling her out directly in such snarky ways if they weren't nervous or if they didn't feel like, oh, wait, she's exposing us. We got to tell the world she's wrong, right? I think it would be more dangerous if we didn't hear those kind of direct attacks from Amy Coney Barrett or others. Some have said if she's more quiet, will she get them to kind of come her way on rulings? Will she convince? And I don't think that's going to happen. And so I think her being bold, her being sometimes aggressive, her saying it just like it is a good strategy. We need that in this moment.
And I also think it's like very sort of racially microaggressive to be like, well, the first Black woman on the court
I was going
really
to
needs to
say,
not be so aggressive
Yeah,
and to be
tone it down.
nicer and just tone
right.
it down and try to just convince people by baking them cookies and just being really nice. And Jackson she's standing in her truth, but she's not being rude about it, right? Like she's not talking about jiggery pokery and all of the nonsense, kind of rudeness that Scalia and Alito and Thomas tend to pepper in their opinions. She's just telling it like it is. And sort of, I think that she's working as a counterweight to Sonia Sotomayor because Sonia Sotomayor tends to, I think, focus on how particular cases are going to impact people. whereas Jackson seems to be focusing on how these cases are impacting the rule of law and the institution. And so I think them working together is a really powerful pair.
Yeah, I love the way that she is folding in Black voices into originalist discourse. Like, you don't get to just claim that the originalists were only these handful of dudes. Like, that's not a historical reality. And so she is a gift. But speaking of, who are some talented progressive judges in the lower courts that we should know about, right? Who are the future Justice Jacksons and Justice Sotomayors that our audience should have their eyes on?
Yeah, and I think when we think about hope, when we think about being ready for the moment,
Yep.
I think there are many fantastic lower court judges that we are seeing. There's Amir Ali in the District of DC who blocked Trump's funding freeze in the USAID case. Dale Ho has been
Oh,
quite exciting,
he's a
wrestling with
favorite of the
Trump.
podcast.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Lauren Alicon, who restored the fired Democrat to the Federal Trade Commission, Jennifer Sung in the Ninth Circuit, who heard the case about Trump deploying the National Guard. I think there's a number of really exciting judges on the lower courts that we should all be watching and be ready to kind of prop up and support when the time comes.
And I think that we have a talented crop of folks on state Supreme Courts as well that Democrats and progressives can look to. I think of states like Wisconsin, where those judges on their state Supreme Court have really been holding the line on democracy for a while now, and under wild partisan attacks in their electoral system. And the way that that just sort of builds you up a little different. So I think that we don't hear about the bench from Democrats and progressives as much, and I think there's a tendency to assume that it's not deep. But to your point that you had said earlier, when we broaden the lens and look at possible candidates from a sort of multifaceted coalition background, let's have movement lawyers. Like, I cut my teeth as a law student in legal services and was doing housing law. Like, let's get some housing law attorneys on the bench. That would be a wild approach, right? And so I think if we can look beyond sort of the traditional pedigreed institutions for our next round of candidates, the law is well served that way as well.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And we have to be thinking in those terms. And I think you're right also to bring up the state Supreme Courts and the state courts in general. And we are seeing fantastic leadership. And especially in this moment when the federal courts are being intentionally weakened and threatened,
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing state courts sort of stand up. And so we should all be paying attention. And I think we also have to be thinking about, how do we bring this same approach of making the courts understandable to the public by bringing all of these different backgrounds of judges to the attention of the public, right? Like, what's a legal aid lawyer? Why is it important that you did, housing and eviction cases? Why is that going to be important on the bench, right? I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with you that we need to focus on movement lawyers. We need to kind of open up the realm and not just think about, Ivy League law clerk kind of backgrounds.
This has been amazing. Not every day do we get to have somebody on the podcast who is able to just speak in such a clear way about what is going on with the federal courts right now, and in a way that doesn't leave us all wanting to take a bold step off a first floor window. It's hard out there right now. And I have a lot of empathy for folks who are still in the profession. Man, do I feel for folks who are trying to teach constitutional law right now.
Oh,
How?
geez,
What are you
how?
doing? Good luck to all of you. But I think, the takeaways from our conversation with you, Rachel, for me, is that this immediate moment is going to require some fortitude. It's going to require some grit to get through. But if Democrats and progressives are able to focus on the long game and really appreciate the riches that are in their movement spaces, the rebuild is not only possible, but beautiful. And I love the idea of that as a future that I can think about for my kids. I may not see it, but they could. They could. So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on Boom Lawyered, for walking us through this in a way that doesn't leave us feeling just completely despondent. And we do hope that you will come back to the show sometime. Hopefully, not around a Trump nomination, hopefully, around something better.
Yes, call me when something good happens. No,
We will. I promise.
No, I feel honored to be on the show with you both. And thank you for what you're doing to just bring light to these really critical issues of the courts. It's really been great to join you.
Rachel, how can folks support your organization? Where can they find your work? How can folks learn more about Alliance for Justice?
Yes, you can go to our website, Alliance for Justice, and you can also check out our social media. Please do sign up on our website. You can sign up to get our email subscription, and we would love if people just get involved and connected with us.
So that's going to wrap it up for this summer session of Boom Lawyered. We're really excited to have had Rachel join us. We are excited for our listeners to hear what she has to say. Please don't forget to follow Rewire News Group on all of the things. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and TikTok. And if you want to talk to either Jess or me personally, you can follow me on Blue Sky at Angry Black Lady, and Jess is on Blue Sky at Hegemommy, Hegemommy. And please make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube so that you will get a notification every time that we post a video, because we're back in video, baby. Like, this Boom Lawyered is coming in hot. So please leave us a review, share the show with your friends. If you have a law nerd in your life that you think could benefit from our witticism and our knowledge, please share our show with them. And on that note, what are we going to do, Jess?
We're going to see you on the tubes, folks.
We'll see you on the tubes, folks.